My in-laws began to take every decision for my child while my husband said nothing and asked me to shut it out when I protested. When they arrived one day to pick him up, I still remember the day my son, Liam, was born. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, a culmination of love, hope, and new beginnings. Instead, it became the starting point of a battle I never asked for. The moment he came into this world, so did the vultures. My in-laws. They hovered around us in the hospital, eager to claim their territory. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was the first to scoop Liam into her arms, barely letting me hold him after the nurse placed him against my chest. "Look at him. Bella," she cooed, rocking him as though she had given birth herself. "Doesn't he look just like David when he was a baby?" "Oh, you're going to be just like your daddy, aren't you?" I forced a smile, feeling the warmth of my baby being stolen right out of my arms. The exhaustion from labor dulled my ability to protest, and when I glanced at my husband, David, he only grinned proudly at his mother. That was the first time I felt the sharp sting of being rendered invisible. But I was too exhausted and emotional to make a fuss. I convinced myself that they were just excited first-time grandparents. After all, I was a new mother too. We were all learning. But the learning never came for them, it was all claiming. The first few weeks at home were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was the slow but aggressive takeover of my child's life. Margaret and her husband, Thomas, came over unannounced. Not once or twice, but nearly every day. They walked in as though they owned the place. No knock. No call. Just the jangle of their keys in the lock. "I know you must be so tired," Margaret would chirp, plucking Liam from his crib without asking. "I'll just take him off your hands for a while." I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I was a new mom struggling with breastfeeding and sleep deprivation. But the unease crawled over my skin every time she rocked him, kissed him without asking, or insisted on taking him for just a little walk around the neighborhood. Then, the decisions started. Margaret took it upon herself to switch Liam's formula brand because she read somewhere that the one I was using caused colic. She decided which baby clothes he should wear, always favoring the ones she had gifted, and made condescending remarks about the ones my mother had given me. "These ones are so cheap-looking," she muttered once, holding up a onesie my mother had bought. I bit my tongue. David was always conveniently absent when they were around. And when I confronted him, he shrugged it off. "She's just excited to be a grandmother, Bella," he said with an exasperated sigh. "Don't make this into a big deal." And when I pushed back? When I told him how suffocated I felt? He simply said, "Just shut it out. Let it go. It's not worth the fight," but for me, it was, motherhood is supposed to be sacred, a bond no one can take away. It's supposed to be a connection between a mother and her child that no one dares to trespass. At least, that's what I thought. But I learned the hard way that it could be stripped from you, slowly, painfully. And without anyone noticing. Not even your own husband. It didn't happen overnight. No, it was a gradual invasion. Subtle at first, then bold and unyielding. Like weeds crawling through the cracks of a garden, my in-laws grew into every corner of my life, suffocating me in my own home. I should have noticed the signs sooner. It started with the subtle thefts, small moments of motherhood that I never got to claim. When Liam was about 4 months old, I had been eagerly awaiting his first taste of solid food. I'd been researching recipes, excited to introduce him to mashed sweet potatoes or pureed carrots. I had even bought a tiny blue bowl with baby-friendly spoons, imagining the adorable mess he'd make. But I came home one afternoon to find Margaret in the kitchen, sitting at the table with Liam on her lap. His mouth and cheeks were smeared with something bright orange. She glanced up, smiling widely. "Oh. He loved the sweet potatoes," she gushed, as if she had done me a favor. I froze in the doorway, the diaper bag still slung over my shoulder. You fed him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She waved it off casually. Of course. He was ready. You were dragging your feet with all that waiting nonsense. Babies need real food, not just milk. I stood there, stunned. The excitement I had carried for days, waiting to see his expression when he tasted food for the first time, was stolen in an instant. I was devastated. David came home an hour later, and I told him what happened. I expected him to be furious, to demand that his parents respect my place as Liam's mother. But instead, he shrugged. It's just baby food, Bella. Why are you so upset? He didn't understand. He never did. After that, the thefts became more frequent, more deliberate. Liam's first words came a few months later. I was at the grocery store when Margaret called me. Her voice was shrill with excitement. He said, "Dada?" He said it. I felt my knees buckle slightly in the middle of the cereal aisle. I clutched the phone tightly. "You're sure?" I whispered, my throat constricting. "Yes. I have it on video." "I'll send it to you," she chirped, proud of herself. I hung up, my hands trembling. I felt cheated, robbed of witnessing my own child's first word. I should have been the one who saw it first. I should have been the one recording it with shaky hands and tears in my eyes, but I wasn't. Margaret was. When I came home, I confronted David with tears stinging my eyes. "She keeps taking everything from me," I cried. He barely looked up from his phone. "You're being dramatic. You can't control every moment. Babies do things unexpectedly. Let it go. Let it go." Those 3 words became his response to every stolen moment, every trespass, and every ache in my chest. It didn't stop at the milestones. No, my in-laws made it clear that they were the ones in charge. When Liam turned 1, I spent weeks planning a small birthday party with close friends and family. I wanted it to be special, his first ever party, something meaningful and simple. I baked a cake myself, filled with love, and arranged colorful decorations. But when Margaret arrived, she came with a second cake, an extravagant, 3-tiered confection with gold trimmings and Liam's face printed on the top. Thomas strolled in with boxes of expensive party favors, the kind that made my carefully chosen decorations look cheap and amateurish. They swept in like royalty, pushing aside everything I had planned. Without asking, Margaret announced, "We'll have him open our gifts first." I watched as they placed Liam in the center of their grand display, showering him with expensive toys and clothes, while my carefully wrapped presents sat unopened on the table. I felt small. Invisible. Like a guest at my own son's birthday party. Later that night, when everyone was gone, I sat at the edge of the bed, tears burning my eyes. I confronted David, my voice hoarse with emotion. "Why did you let them take over? Why didn't you say anything?" He was already half asleep, indifferent to my anguish. "Bella," he muttered. "They're just excited. It's a party. Stop making a big deal out of everything." And just like that, he turned away from me. It didn't take long for Margaret and Thomas to become the self-proclaimed decision-makers for Liam. When Liam turned 2, they convinced David that they should redecorate Liam's nursery without telling me. I had designed it myself, soft gray walls with cloud decals, a mobile of stars and moons over his crib, and a cozy rocking chair by the window where I'd sung him lullabies. But one afternoon, I returned home from running errands to find them inside Liam's room, painting the walls a harsh, sterile blue. The clouds were gone. The mobile was replaced with one shaped like a helicopter, more suitable for a boy, Margaret had declared. His cozy corner with his soft plush animals had been cleared out to make room for a play structure Thomas had installed. I felt my stomach drop. "What have you done?" I asked, my voice shaking. Margaret turned to me, paintbrush still in hand. "We thought it was time for a change," she said with a sickeningly sweet smile. "He needs a real boy's room." "Bella. You were making it too delicate." I stared at the room, stripped of all the love and tenderness I had put into it. Gone were the soft grays and warm textures. In their place were sharp blues and hard, plastic corners. It wasn't a nursery anymore, it was a monument to their control. I turned to David, who had been leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Did you know about this?" I demanded. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes averted. "Yeah, they mentioned it. I figured it would be a nice surprise." A surprise? I felt sick. I walked out of the room and slammed the door behind me. The final blow came one afternoon when I overheard Margaret talking to her friend over the phone. I had been walking past the guest bedroom when I heard her voice. "Oh yes, we practically raise him," she said with a boastful chuckle. "Bella is so inexperienced. She's too soft with him. He needs structure. Honestly, I don't think she's fit to raise him on her own. It's a good thing we're here." I froze in the hallway, bile rising in my throat. I wasn't just being undermined, they were positioning themselves as better parents. More capable. More deserving. They were slowly erasing me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that if I didn't take back control, I would lose my son forever. Not literally, they couldn't take him from me. But they were stealing him piece by piece. His firsts. His memories. His milestones. And if I didn't act, they would continue stripping me of my motherhood until there was nothing left. I stared at the ceiling, my jaw clenched. No more. I wouldn't just push back, I would blow their entire world apart. And I would do it with a smile on my face. The breaking point came on a gray Saturday morning. Margaret and Thomas showed up without notice, as usual, with matching smug smiles. "We're taking Liam for the weekend," Margaret announced, already reaching for his diaper bag. I stiffened. "Excuse me?" I asked, clutching Liam to my chest. "We're going to the lake house. It'll be fun for him," she added as if it were a done deal. "I wasn't informed of this," I said through gritted teeth. Margaret's face hardened. "Well, David said it was fine." "Didn't he tell you?" she smirked. I glared at my husband, who had been standing near the kitchen counter with his arms crossed. He met my eyes and shrugged. "They're just taking him for 2 nights, Bella. It's not a big deal," he muttered. Not a big deal. My child being whisked away without my consent. I felt the rage bubbling, but this time, I didn't fight. "No," I smiled. "Of course," I said sweetly. "Give me a moment to pack his things." I turned and walked to Liam's nursery, keeping my head low to hide the storm brewing in my eyes. That was the moment I made the decision. No more being invisible. No more being dismissed. It was time to make them pay. The next day, when they came to pick Liam up, I was ready. I handed over his neatly packed bag, gave him a long, loving kiss, and whispered softly into his ear, "Mommy will always protect you." I watched them drive away, my heart pounding. Then, I moved. First, I grabbed my laptop and logged into our shared family email account. David, being lazy with security, had saved all his passwords on our home computer. I sent emails from his account to Margaret and Thomas. In the emails, I wrote, "Thank you for all your help, but Bella and I have decided to be more independent with our parenting. We'll be limiting visitations to once a month." I smiled. Then, I blocked their numbers from David's phone while he was in the shower. I changed the locks. I called the local police station and reported that an unauthorized couple had taken my child without explicit parental consent, providing details of their car and license plate. Finally, I packed David's bags. The morning they returned with Liam was dull and gray, the perfect weather for the storm I was about to unleash. I had spent the previous night tossing and turning, unable to sleep, my heart thrumming with anticipation. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Margaret's smug face, her condescending smile as she paraded my son around like he was her possession. But not today. Today, they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The clock ticked slowly as I waited by the window. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. The baby monitor on the coffee table displayed Liam's peaceful face as he napped in his crib, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. My stomach tightened when I spotted their car pulling into the driveway, the same silver SUV they had used to whisk Liam away without my explicit permission. Margaret stepped out first, beaming, holding Liam's tiny hand as if she were his mother. Her eyes sparkled with a self-satisfied glimmer, the same look she wore every time she undermined me. Thomas followed close behind, his hands casually stuffed into his coat pockets, whistling as though he hadn't just spent an entire weekend treating my child as their personal possession. My fingers tightened around the fabric of my sweater. I didn't move. I waited. As they walked toward the house, Margaret bent down and kissed Liam on the cheek. "You'll come to Grandma and Grandpa's again soon, won't you, my sweet boy?" she cooed. My blood boiled. "You won't," I thought. "Not ever." When they reached the porch, Margaret's eyes met mine through the window. She smiled warmly, the same infuriatingly patronizing smile she had given me for the last 2 years, the smile of a woman who believed she had one. She had no idea what was coming. I waited until they rang the doorbell before I made my move. Cool and composed, I walked to the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see their smug faces. Margaret beamed. "We had the most wonderful weekend." "Liam loved the lake house," she trilled, brushing past me as though she owned the place. Thomas clapped David on the back. "Hey, son. You missed a hell of a bonfire last night." "Liam couldn't get enough of the fireworks," he chuckled. My eyes flicked to David, who was standing in the hallway with a half-smile on his face. The fool still thought this was just a pleasant family visit. He didn't know what I had done yet. Margaret strolled into the living room, pulling Liam along with her, completely unaware of the trap she was walking into. I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. And then, they arrived. 2 squad cars pulled into the driveway, lights flashing red and blue against the gray sky. The neighbors peeked through their curtains. A few came out onto their porches, watching with thinly veiled curiosity. Margaret and Thomas turned toward the window, their faces twisting with confusion. David's brows furrowed. "Wait, what the hell?" he muttered, walking toward the door. Margaret's hand instinctively tightened around Liam's tiny fingers. She glanced at me, alarm flickering in her eyes. What's going on?" she stammered. The officers stepped onto the porch with calm, authoritative strides. "Good afternoon. Are you Margaret and Thomas Reynolds?" the lead officer asked, pulling out his notepad. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. She clutched Liam closer. "Yes, we are." "What's this about?" she asked, her voice growing shrill with defensiveness. The officer's eyes remained impassive. "We received a report of an unauthorized removal of a minor from parental custody," he said firmly. Margaret's face paled. "What? That's ridiculous." "We're his grandparents," she shrieked. The officer didn't flinch. "You are not his legal guardians, and there was no formal consent for you to take him overnight. We need to verify custody arrangements with the child's parents." Margaret whirled around, eyes blazing with fury. Her gaze locked onto me. "You did this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe, my lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile. "Yes," I said softly. "I did." Margaret's eyes widened, flashing with disbelief. "You called the police on us?" "On us? We're his grandparents," she screeched, her voice rising. Thomas, previously smug and casual, suddenly turned red with fury. "You're out of your mind, Bella," he bellowed, stepping forward aggressively. But the officers were unmoved. "Please step away from the child," the officer instructed firmly, extending his arm between them and Liam. Margaret clung to Liam. "She's making a mistake. We didn't do anything wrong. We're family," she wailed. Her voice cracked with desperation. I took a slow step forward, my eyes never leaving hers. "You're not his mother," I said coldly, my voice slicing through her protests, "and you never will be." Her lips quivered. I could see the color draining from her face. She was losing. For once, she was losing. The officer gently but firmly separated Liam from her grasp, and I reached out, wrapping my arms around my son. He clung to me instantly, nuzzling into my neck. My eyes stung with emotion, but I kept my face blank and steady. I would not show weakness. Not in front of them. Behind me, David finally spoke up. "What the hell is this, Bella?" he snapped, marching toward me. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "You called the cops on my parents?" There was anger in his voice, but I could hear the edge of panic. He was losing control. I slowly turned to face him, my expression void of warmth. "Yes, David," I said icily. "Because you clearly weren't going to stop them." "So I did." His mouth fell open slightly. He was still processing it. The weak man who had stood by, who had allowed his parents to treat me like a glorified nanny, was now staring at me with the pathetic disbelief of someone who never thought I'd fight back. But I did. And he had no idea what else was coming. Margaret, humiliated and shaking with rage, pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice venomous. "I did everything for him. Everything." Her voice cracked as she choked back tears. "He's more mine than yours," she whimpered brokenly. For a brief moment, I saw the flash of genuine grief in her eyes, the grief of losing what she thought was hers, but I didn't care. She had overstepped too many times. This was my child, not hers, and now she knew it. The officers issued them a formal warning for unauthorized removal of a minor and escorted them from the property. They left humiliated and shaking. Thomas slammed the car door so hard it echoed down the street. Margaret sobbed into her hands as they drove away. When they were gone, David whirled around. His face was red with fury. "You had no right to do that," he spat. I calmly turned to him and walked into the hallway, where his packed bags sat neatly by the door. His eyes flicked to the bags, confusion flashing across his face. His voice faltered, What is this?" I met his gaze with steady, unflinching eyes. "It's your turn to leave, David," I said coldly. "You can go to your parents now. You'll fit right in." For the first time in years, I saw the color drain from his face. I held Liam close, my voice unwavering. "You chose them over us. Now, you can have them." He stood there, frozen, as I walked back inside and shut the door behind me. I turned the locks and stood in the silence, holding my son tightly against my chest. My hands trembled slightly, but my heart was steady. I had taken back my power. And no one, not David, not Margaret, not Thomas, would ever take it from me again. The house was completely still, except for the gentle sound of Liam's steady breathing as he napped on my chest. I sat in the rocking chair by his window, slowly moving back and forth, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. His soft fingers clung to my shirt, holding on even in his sleep. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, painting the nursery in hues of orange and gold. For the first time in a long time, the room felt safe. It felt like mine again. No longer tainted by Margaret's meddling or Thomas's dismissive presence. No longer overshadowed by David's indifference. I leaned down and pressed my lips to Liam's hair, inhaling his sweet baby scent. My son. Mine. No one would ever take him from me again. But as the golden light spilled into the room, my eyes drifted toward the porch, where David's bag still sat by the door. He hadn't come back. And he wouldn't. The first day after I kicked him out, David bombarded me with messages. It started with predictable outrage. "You're being insane, Bella. Let me in. We need to talk. You humiliated my parents. You'll regret this." When I didn't respond, he tried guilt. "You're ruining Liam's future. Do you really want him to grow up without a father?" I stared at my phone, unfazed. Liam was already growing up without a father. David had been little more than a bystander, a spineless, pathetic man who let his parents steamroll his wife and son. I turned off my phone without responding. The next morning, he called. Again. And again. And again. I let it ring each time. Eventually, I turned the phone off altogether and cradled Liam in my arms. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I didn't need to listen to his begging. That night, a knock came at the door. I glanced through the peephole, half expecting the police or some legal stunt orchestrated by Margaret. But it was David. His face was pale and tired, his eyes bloodshot. He looked disheveled, as though he hadn't slept. He pressed his hand against the door, voice hoarse. "Bella," he whispered. "Please, just let me in." I stared at him through the peephole, my hand steady, my breathing calm. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't open the door. I simply turned around, walked back to the living room, and sank into the couch with Liam sleeping soundly in my arms. I didn't owe David anything. Not anymore. After the police incident, Margaret and Thomas made no secret of their bitterness. The next morning, I received an email from Margaret. The subject line was all in caps, "You went too far." Her words were venomous and filled with self-pity. "How could you call the police on us? Do you have any idea how humiliated we were? The neighbors saw everything. We have always been there for Liam. We did nothing wrong. You are a selfish, ungrateful girl." I didn't respond. I let her words sit in her inbox, unanswered. As useless and powerless as she was now, over the following weeks, she tried everything. She called from different numbers, left emotional voicemails, and even showed up at the park when I was there with Liam. Her voice was trembling with desperation. "You can't do this, Bella," she pleaded, her eyes wet with tears. "He's my grandson. I love him." I stood my ground. "You love him?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You loved him so much you tried to take him away from me. You loved him so much you erased me from his life. That's not love, Margaret. That's control." Her face paled. I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her standing there, powerless and broken. She called out after me, but I didn't turn around. She had lost, and she knew it. True to her vindictive nature, Margaret wasn't going to walk away quietly. 2 weeks later, I received a notice in the mail. She and Thomas were attempting to file for grandparents' rights. My lips curled into a bitter smile. Of course they were. They truly believed they were entitled to Liam, even after everything they had done. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this for months. The day after they took Liam to the lake house without my consent, I had contacted a lawyer. I had documented everything: their frequent unannounced visits, their unauthorized overnight stays, the times they took Liam without explicit permission, their repeated undermining of my parenting decisions. I had copies of text messages, voicemails, and even the police report from the day they were pulled over. When my lawyer presented the case to the judge, the evidence was overwhelming. Not only did the judge deny their request for visitation rights, but the court also issued a no-contact order. Margaret and Thomas were legally barred from contacting me or Liam. If they did, they would face criminal charges. When the verdict was announced, Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing violently into her hands. Thomas sat beside her, red-faced and seething, but unable to do anything. The mighty, arrogant couple who had once dictated every aspect of my life were now nothing but two pathetic, broken people, stripped of their power, stripped of their access, and stripped of their control. I watched them fall apart with a steady, calm expression. No pity. No sympathy. Only satisfaction. As for David, he became a ghost in Liam's life. After the court order against his parents, he tried to negotiate a joint custody arrangement. But he was woefully unprepared for my legal defense. The judge, after reviewing David's indifference and lack of parental involvement, denied him primary custody. David was granted supervised visitation, 3 hours every other weekend. He sat alone in the courtroom as the ruling was announced, his face pale and hollow. The man who once told me to shut it out now sat silently, gutted by the consequences of his own complacency. His parents were gone from Liam's life. And soon, so was he. The first time he showed up for his supervised visit, Liam didn't recognize him. David knelt down, arms open. "Hey, buddy," he whispered softly, his voice shaky. "It's Daddy." Liam clung to my leg, his small face crinkling with confusion. "Mommy," he whimpered, turning away from David's outstretched hands. David's eyes filled with pain, but I didn't comfort him. I simply lifted Liam into my arms and smiled softly. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into his hair. "Mommy's here. Mommy's always here." And I walked away without looking back. In the weeks and months that followed, peace slowly returned to our lives. No more unannounced visits. No more condescending remarks or stolen milestones. No more invasive control. I redecorated Liam's nursery the way I had always wanted. I painted it a soft, warm gray with gentle stars scattered across the walls. I placed his favorite plush animals back in their rightful place and restored the cozy corner where I read him bedtime stories. I took back what was mine. What had always been mine, and as I rocked Liam in the chair by the window, feeling his tiny fingers gripping mine, I knew he was safe. He was loved. He was home. No one would ever take that from us again, not David, not Margaret, not Thomas. No one.